So anyways, this Emily mentioned this is going to be a tag team between myself and Kurt Vollmer. But I also definitely need to acknowledge Barb Scott, all of her hard work with these projects. Barb's been working with me for a number of years and oversees a lot of the vegetables and did a lot of the survey work that I'm going to talk about. So, all right. So we give just kind of a quick update on some of the herbicides, and then I'm going to summarize our survey work, and then Kurt's going to talk about new upcoming registration for Lima beans. Just going to put in a plug again for the Mid-Atlantic Commercial Vegetable Production Guide. This was not published in 2021, but there is an update that's out there. Be sure to get that. If you do not have this commercial recommendation guide, by all means, get a hold of a copy. It is a source of information for everything from cell prep to harvest time. So be sure you get that. Looking for information on weeds. This Weeds of the Northeast is an excellent publication available online for about 10 or 15 bucks. And there's a list of extension websites that have a number of weeds and weed identification information. These are 4 that I use particularly for identification. Be sure to go to these sites, bookmark them, make them available so you have them ready come growing season. Want to start off talking about one of the problem weeds that we're having more and more issues with in field crops, and it is something that we've had problems in the past in some of our vegetables, and that's common ragweed, particularly herbicide-resistant common ragweed. There's been a number of reports of poor performance in this whole region on common ragweed, and a number of products not controlling it. So I have a graduate student, Frank Diamaco, who's been working on this. Frank is he's collected about 40 different accessions of common ragweed in the region from Virginia up to northern New Jersey. At each of these sites, there was a few collections. So this is not just the collections, but so in Delaware, I think we have like 8 collections, but they were primarily from the Harrington area and Sussex, Georgetown area. So anyways, he's collected seeds from multiple sites. These were mostly soybean fields where poor performance of herbicides. And so it's collected seeds late in the season. He conditioned the seeds in order for them to germinate. He had 34 accessions that germinated in enough quantity to run these trials. He sprayed across the top of these plants as seedlings. He sprayed glyphosate, first rate, and reflex. He started off with a 1x rate, went with a 2x rate, and a 4x rate of each of these products. And you can see the rates that were listed here. And just kind of a quick summary, out of the 34 suspected resistant populations, 31 of them were resistant to glyphosate. So a lot of the failures that we saw suspected were resistance, not just environmental problems, spraying too late, those sort of things, but true resistance. 26 out of the 34 were resistant to first rate. And all of those that were resistant to first rate were also resistant to glyphosate. So if the ALS products are not controlling it, switching it to glyphosate is not an option. And then a total of 6 accessions were highly resistant to reflex, and 6 had a lower level of resistance. So in all, there were 12 of those 34 accessions that were resistant to um, uh, uh, reflex. And if the population was resistant to first rate or to reflex, it was resistant to both first rate and glyphosate. So if they were resistant to reflex, they were three-way resistance. So just be aware there is more and more problems out there with herbicide resistance in our common ragweed populations. And as we think about our herbicide options for snap beans, lima beans, and a lot of our other vegetables, we don't have alternatives to ALS chemistry and PPO. So we really need to be vigilant about our herbicide rotation and avoiding the development of resistance. And then if we suspect it, that we keep it isolated and don't spread it with equipment. So we wanted to talk a little bit about a survey that we did this past summer, and that's kind of a collective we. This is where Barb Scott really helped out, did a tremendous amount of work organizing this and sampling the fields. This is part of a multi-state project organized by the USDA, University of Illinois. There's about 9 different states that are involved: New York, Delaware, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, a couple of the Pacific Northwest states. And we're simply going in at harvest, close to harvest, and doing a survey of weeds that are present. We sampled about 1 sample per 5 acres of a field. So depending on the size of the field, we may have been a little bit more intensive than others, but we got at least 20 to 25 samples per field. We identify weeds that we identified the stage, and we identified the density. The real challenge was collecting the production information. This was something that we're trying to collect across these multiple states and see if there's an association between production practices and resulting weeds at the end of the season. And I really need to give a huge thank to Kenny, Justin, Rob, and Steve for really helping us, pointing us to which fields were getting close to harvest, and in many cases making some of the contacts with the farmers. Want to thank all the farmers who collaborated with us and gave us access to the fields for us to survey them. We just could not have done this without everybody. So thank you very, very much. With the snap beans, we harvested 14 fields. The planting dates kind of broke out between early and late. You see the planting dates here. Across those 14 fields, we had 220 sampling sites. We identified 19 different species, and the number of species in any one field ranged from 1 to 7 different species. These were the most common species that we found in snap beans. Morning glory was present, and it was the most common weed and present in over 70% of the field, followed by pigweed. And this pigweed is the smooth pigweed, or the redwood pigweed. It was not Palmer. It was the old pigweed, which again is still giving us problems and fits. Carpetweed and fall panicum were the next 2 most common. And then you can see the list here of some of the others that we had coming in. Just got a summary on the snap beans. All of the summer annual weeds that were with that early planted fields were only misprint on that one. They were only in the vegetative stage when we sampled snap bean fields. So the early planted ones had not begun to flower yet. All the late planted fields were in reproductive stages when we went in and did our survey. So those plants were producing seeds that were contributing to the seed bank as well. All the winter annual weeds that we found in snap beans were only in the seedling stage, vegetative stage. They were not producing seeds. On our Lima beans, we did 23 fields. We had 3 groupings of planting date, early, mid, and late. We ended up sampling 44 fields, and we sampled 23 fields and over 440 sampling sites. We identified 26 different species in lima beans, and the number of species ranged from 0 to 8. So yes, there was one field out there where we sampled 22 sites and didn't have a single weed in those. This is the most common species that we saw. Carpet weed was the most common on about 5 of the sites. Again, morning glory, similar to the snap beans, morning glories was quite common. Chickweed, pigweed, fall panicum. So a lot of the same characters in our lima bean fields that we saw in snap bean fields. So we, at this point, we just have our survey data, so there's not a lot as far as conclusions we can make on this, but just all of our what we did observe was all of our summer annual weeds had reached reproductive stage regardless of planting date. So with a little bit later planting date with lima beans and the longer production season, all the weeds had an opportunity to reach that reproductive stage and produce seeds. All the winter annual species were vegetative stage. So even though some of these fields had quite a few winter annual weeds there, that was more, I won't say cosmetic, but they were not very competitive, and all came in late in the growing season. The number of weeds per sample ranged from 0 to 6 plants. So again, just over observation, earlier planting dates and shorter season did not produce weed seeds. And the winter annual weeds are coming in late and unlikely to be an issue in these beans, even though they might be at high numbers. They were all very small and in the seedling stage. However, if that field is going to go into a small grain or maybe even a cover crop without anything to do to kill those seedlings, winter annuals, that they're going to have a jump on that next crop, and so they do need to be managed if you're putting in a crop after limas or snaps. And we're looking to repeat this in 2021. And again, I really want to thank all those who helped us out on this project. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Vollmer, and he's going to talk about upcoming registration.
All right. Thank you, Mark. All right. First of all, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kurt Vollmer. I am the Extension Weed Management Specialist with the University of Maryland. I was previously a postdoc with Mark over at the Carville Research and Education Center. And today, as Mark mentioned, we're really kind of struggling with some of our herbicide-resistant weeds, especially these ALS-resistant pigweed species and ragweed species that Mark mentioned earlier. So one of the things I wanted to update you all on is a potential or a pending 24C label for dual magnum in lima beans. Now, dual magnum is, again, pending 24C registration. This 24C label will allow for post-emergence applications of dual magnum, which is generally applied as a pre-emergence treatment for residual weed control. The post-emergence applications will allow us to extend that residual control, but the total labeled amount is not going to be, cannot exceed 2 pints per season. So if you put out 1 pint as a pre-emergence treatment, you're only allowed to put out 1 pint as a post-emergence treatment. Also, the label is going to recommend applying after the first trifoliate stage. There's going to be a 50-day pre-harvest interval, and you cannot feed plants treated with post-emergence applications of dual magnum to animals. And real quick, I want to emphasize that this label is for dual magnum only, not for a dual 2 magnum. And finally, dual Magnum will not control emerged weeds. It only provides residual weed control. But this comes in hand. Where does this come in hand? Well, the benefit is to use it as an overlapping residual weed control treatment. So normally, if we think about when we apply our soil active herbicides right after planting, this gives us normally about 4 weeks of residual weed control. When we talk about overlapping those residual herbicides, we apply a second soil active herbicide right before that length of residual control expires, and hopefully we can extend that weed control period and get a good crop canopy, which will help to suppress any further weed growth. So several studies were conducted the past couple of years evaluating crop safety and weed control efficacy. In some of our greenhouse studies, we evaluated 6 different lima bean varieties, and the predominant type of injury we saw was this type of leaf speckling right after herbicide application. And I want to point out that this type of speckling was simply contact injury, and we really didn't see it on any of the new growth. We examined 4 different rates of post-emergence dual Magnum applications, 0.75 pints up to 4.5 pints. And we really didn't see any significant leaf speckling at the 0.75 pint rate, which is what the new label is going to be recommending. Even at going as high as 1.5 pints, we didn't see a lot of leaf speckling or leaf spotting. And again, this leaf spotting injury was only contact, it was transient, and you didn't see anything on the new leaf growth. Just as we saw an increase in leaf spotting with increased rates of dual Magnum, we also saw that higher rates of post applications of dual Magnum did increase stunting. However, we didn't observe any significant differences in plant stunting with our 0.75 rate or our 1.5 pint per acre rate compared to our untreated checks. In our field studies, we evaluated both weed control efficacy and crop safety from both pre and post-emergence dual applications, using a high rate 1 pint pre and a higher rate of 1.2 pints pre, followed by 0.75 pints or 1.2 pints applied post at either 2 to 3 weeks after planting, 3 to 4 weeks after planting, or 4 to 5 weeks after planting. But as far as injury goes, most of the injury that we saw in the field was a result of drawstringing, which is typical of this herbicide. But overall, even though we saw some statistical differences in weed control, or excuse me, crop safety, we didn't see any strong biological differences. All injury was less than 8%, and we didn't see any injury on the new growth. As far as weed control goes, using dual Magnum cannot be used as a standalone tactic. Although this approach resulted in reduced density of certain weeds, it did not provide optimal control. For example, here we see a weed-free check, and we can compare it to our untreated control. While most of the other plots have low to moderate weed control. most of the weeds in these plots are Palmer amaranth. And while this approach did reduce density, remember, a dual magnum does not control emerged weeds. And a single Palmer amaranth plant can grow to be very large. In addition, we also had some common cocklebur in these plots, which is another weed that dual magnum will not control. So considerations to use for this overlapping residual approach would be consider your application timing. Again, dual magnum won't control emerged weeds. If you had a very large fluster of weeds come up before you can get that second residual application in, then it's not going to really do you much good. In addition, dual magnum does require a little bit of irrigation or rainfall to activate. Be aware of the species present. Dual magnum is most effective on grasses and small-seeded broadleaf weeds. It's very effective on carpetweed and pigweed species, such as, like Mark mentioned, the red root pigweed, smooth pigweed, and Palmer amaranth, as long as it's applied before emergence. It is not effective on large seeded broadleaf species such as cocklebur, morning glory, and common ragweed. Therefore, while this cannot be used as a standalone approach, integrated approaches can be used in lima beans with this herbicide for better weed control. First would be to use multiple effective pre-emergence herbicides followed by dual magnum. The second would be to rely on your pre-emergence herbicides and then control the emerged weeds via cultivation and then apply the dual magnum post. This particular technique does have some promise, especially since we've seen that dual magnum post really doesn't cause significant injury to lima bean. And this tactic could be used to, one, help remove the emerged weeds and then provide that longer length of residual control before we develop a good crop canopy. So with that, I would like to acknowledge everyone who's helped me with this research. This was funded by the Delaware Department of Agriculture Specialty Crop Block Grant. I'd also like to thank the University of Delaware Weed Science crew. As Emily can attest, it's a lot of work hand harvesting lima bean plots. It's even harder when all of your plots are infested with weeds. And I'd also like to thank the UD Carville Farm crew for all the assistance they've provided in this study. Thank you.
I have a question in regards to command. Is there anything that can be done with a 2,500 foot buffer around housing developments? And then also on this dual magnum post-emergence, can you tank mix that with something like a Raptor?
The command, I'm not sure. That would be something we need to investigate, whether there was something to help mitigate the command. Oh, we'll have to get back to you on that one, James, and see if it's a possibility and maybe what type of information or data they might need to reduce that. As far as the possibility of tank mixing it, the lima beans with the dual and wrap, we have not looked at that. Although I would be a little hesitant to try that. I would without a little bit more work, particularly because if you're going to use the Raptor, it then carries along the need for using Basagran and 3 different products. All 2 of them the Basgran and the doing EC formulations and stuff, I would just be a little concerned about the injury that we might see with that. So that'd be something we would need to investigate a little bit further. If you think about doing your own investigation on that, I would go gently and just try it on a pretty limited basis. But I think you just gave Kurt another idea for his summer projects, right?
Yes.
I'll pass the buck on that. I'll pass the buck on that one.
Any other questions for Mark or Kurt? I'll ask Kurt, to what growth stage or how large of lima bean plants do you envision the post-emergence dual being useful?
I would say best time to use that application would be right at that first trifoliate leaves. Our earliest application in our studies was 2 weeks after planting, and we did notice that there was some weed emergence within those 2 weeks. Not a whole lot of weed emergence, but you're much safer applying it earlier in the season than later in the season.
Can I bring up another topic real quickly, Emily? I thought I had this in my slides, didn't, but when you mentioned command, it reminded me of this. There was a label early in the season, label change from FMC for command that reinstated the use of command on lima beans. So we can now use command at 4 to 6 ounces. So it's a really low rate, but the intent is to provide some early season suppression of grasses and some of our small seeded broadleaves with command. That label also allows, it changes the rotation restriction before planting lima beans. So in essence, what it means is we can use command in peas and rotate the lima beans with this new label. So it's expanded the use of command. In many ways, goes back to what we had 3 or 4 years ago. And I'd like to thank FMC for working with Delaware Department of Ag and granting that 24 seed.